We're expecting a major ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court at any minute now. It deals with the government and religious freedom. In short, will Hobby Lobby, a Christian-owned company, be forced to provide emergency contraception as part of its health insurance plan? Hobby Lobby already covers birth control for its employees. Its issue was with requirement in Obamacare to cover emergency contraception as well. The company objects to a couple of drugs, Plan B, Ella, and 2 forms of IUDs. Hobby Lobby insists these drugs can induce abortion, although the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development says there is no scientific basis for that assertion. But Hobby Lobby is taking no chances. It's lobbying its position on YouTube.
While the Green family has no objection to providing 16 of the 20 FDA-approved drugs and devices under the federal mandate, providing 4 of the drugs and devices that have the potential to terminate a life conflicts with their faith.
This is an issue of life that we cannot be a part of taking life. And so to be in a situation where our government is telling us that we have to be is incredible.
Russell Moore is the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, and Jonathan Merritt is a senior columnist for the Religion News Service. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be with you.
Thanks so much.
Glad to have you here. Russell, critics say Hobby Lobby is not a church. It's a corporation that employs 13,000 people that happens to be owned by evangelical Christians. If Hobby Lobby prevails, the court would have to decide whether corporations are religious people. Do corporations have religious liberty?
Well, people have religious liberty, and Hobby Lobby is a group of people, a family business, who want to live out their life and to freely exercise their religion and to run their business consistent with their Christian convictions. And that's what this case is all about, whether or not the government can say that you give up your right to freely exercise your religion once you go into the marketplace. We don't think that the government should do that.
Jonathan, do you agree?
Well, I agree to some extent, but I think that in the United States, religious liberties have never been completely and totally secure in all cases. I mean, a person who's a Mennonite, who's a pacifist, still has to pay taxes that fund wars that he believes are unethical. So even though I'm a little bit torn on this case about whether they should rule or not, because I happen to be very strongly pro-life, I do think that it gets complicated. People have raised questions about whether a Jehovah's Witness would be able to restrict blood transfusions and in their health care coverage for their employees, or if you have an employer who's a Christian Scientist, would they be able to say, well, we don't want to provide health care at all? And I think those are questions. If the court rules in the favor of Hobby Lobby, and I think that they will, then I think the question is, how far will those rulings reach into the corporate marketplace?
So, Russell, do you think Jonathan has a point?
No, I don't, because that's the equivalent of saying because the government allows CNN to operate, that means that we have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. What this case is about is whether or not the government needs to demonstrate a compelling interest in forcing people to comply despite their religious objections and to provide the least restrictive means to do so. And so, no, I don't think that's the case at all. There's always a compelling government interest to keep people from killing one another, for instance, or from stealing from one another. Religious liberty is not an absolute trump card. Neither is freedom of speech or freedom of association or any other of the First Amendment guarantees that we have. But what's important here is that the government cannot set itself up as a steamroller, paving over people's consciences.
Well, I guess some critics just can't escape the fact, Jonathan, that a corporation is not a church. It doesn't perform religious exercises, so why should it have the same rights as a religious institution?
Well, I think folks like that would agree with Dr. Moore. I think they've argued that those individuals are protected under the federal RFRA. There are other people on the other side who've said no, that federal RFRA protects individuals from having their religious liberties infringed upon by the federal government, and corporations are not people. So I think this, you know, Dr. Moore raises a really important question. Everybody has to decide if they believe in corporate personhood. If you believe in corporate personhood, then I think you have to extend protections for religious liberties for religious business owners who say that certain policies violate their consciences. But if you don't accept corporate personhood, then I think this is sort of the opposite case for you. You say, well, then why would we protect this, particularly if the government believes that providing contraceptives promote the common good?
Russell, is there some sort of compromise that the Supreme Court could come up with to please both sides?
Well, I think what the Supreme Court can do is to say that the government must show a compelling interest to override people's deeply held faith commitments. And I think that's what the court's going to do. I'm very optimistic about this case because we have a long history in this country of the government recognizing the guarantees included in the First Amendment. They're not guarantees that are granted by the government. They're recognized by the government because they're natural rights for people to freely exercise their religious convictions. And the key issue here is that the government seems to be saying, you can believe whatever you want, you can sing whatever you want in your churches, but you just can't live according to your religious convictions. And that's not the American way. That's not the human way. And so I really think the Supreme Court is going to come down on the right side of this.
Well, could you also look at it this way, Jonathan, that if Hobby Lobby prevails, that gives corporations the right to impose their religious beliefs on me or you or my neighbor?
Well, that certainly is what I think a lot of individuals are arguing. And I agree with Dr. Moore that our religious liberties must be protected. And I think that you do have to show that there's a compelling interest in order to uphold that. I think that historically we've seen that the government has said that there are times where the common good has trumped religious liberties. And that's really the question here. Certainly, if you were to rewind the clock and go back to the 1950s or 1960s, there were people making theological arguments for not allowing African Americans to sit at their lunch counters. These were biblical arguments. These were theological convictions. And the government said, I'm sorry, but this is at odds with the common good. And so the question here is going to be whether or not the government believes that that providing contraception promotes the common good to the extent that it would trump religious liberties. And so this isn't, I don't think, an open shut case when we talk about it. Personally, as a pro-lifer, you know, I'm sympathetic to this. I sort of hope that they rule in favor of Hobby Lobby. But constitutionally, I think it's a little bit more complicated than some people are assuming.
Jonathan Merritt, Russell Moore, thanks so much for your insight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm back in a minute.